This week on Inside Scoop, is peace possible with Putin? Cartels on the rise in Mexico. And blue state blues and what it may mean for the country in 2028. Welcome to Inside Scoop, where we talk about all the news that's fit to print in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle, your host, and this week on our cover from our national security writer Jamie McIntyre, the possibility of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing.
President Trump returned from Washington, D.C. from his Alaska summit with Putin, seemingly empty-handed.
We'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening.
Or at least without a ceasefire. But in the coming days, European leaders and Ukrainian President Zelensky met with Trump in the White House and tried to present a united front for peace.
We're going to call President Putin right after this meeting. I'm sure we're going to have a solid meeting, good meeting, maybe a great meeting, and we're going to try and work out a trilat after that and see if we can get it finished, put this to sleep.
The question is whether Trump can get Russia to begin to get serious about negotiations. The broad outlines of what a deal would look like is coming into focus.
Because of a certain relationship that he has with me running this country, I believe now he's convinced that he's going to make a deal.
Ukraine would end up ceding some of the territory that it lost in the war in exchange for some security guarantees from the West. The specifics of those security guarantees are being filled in over time, with Europe seemingly willing to put boots on the ground, and perhaps there would be a U.S. air support role. However, many of the Europeans and certainly the Ukrainians believe that there need to be more pressure on Putin to begin to make more concessions himself, whereas Trump has seemed to be more inclined to think that he needs to have more incentives. He needs to feel that there are other things that he can accomplish at the negotiating table.
He's a very smart guy. Nothing brought him to the table, so to speak. I think that he respects our country now. He didn't respect it under Biden, I can tell you that.
Some people believe that Trump is being played by Putin. However, there is the reality that Russia has made a lot of gains in the war and has a lot of leverage right now that Ukraine and many of its allies don't, at least at the moment, have. Russia, however, each time there's been a meeting or a phone call or some positive exchange with the Trump administration, has quickly resumed bombing Ukraine, attacking Ukrainian cities. And that's a status quo Western leaders would like to see stop. There are many people in President Trump's political base domestically as well who would like to see an end to U.S. involvement in funding the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly with the arming and backing of the Ukrainian government. Ukraine, however, needs support from the United States to continue to keep its territory where it currently is and not experience further losses. Russia has so far not been dissuaded by efforts to persuade them that their losses of troops would be a good reason to end this battle right now, since they're not really gaining much more territory and they're experiencing severe losses in terms of manpower. Yet they are at the moment less severe than the manpower problems facing Ukraine. Is it possible for Trump to deliver peace between Russia and Ukraine, as he promised so often on the campaign trail? What do you think? Comment down below. And I'm joined this week by our editor and foreign policy writer, Tom Rogan. And Tom, you did a piece this week for the magazine looking at a new cartel, or maybe not so new, but newly powerful cartel rising in Mexico. And there's a lot of talk about sort of not NGOs, but non-government entities that are threatening weaker central governments. What's going on in Mexico, and why should we be concerned about it?
So, thanks for having me on, Jim. So the real thrust of my piece was about this cartel called the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which is the ascendant, powerful cartel in Mexico that has, through a mixture of very clever financial operations, money laundering, very aggressive military operations or terrorist type operations, assassinations of police officers, bribes of politicians, the familiar type cartel activity, has been assuming much greater power inside Mexico, both against rival cartels such as the Sinaloa cartel, which El Chapo Guzman, who some of your viewers might be aware of, who's now in an American prison, used to be the really powerful cartel. Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG as they're known by acronym, has both taken power in terms of its own efforts, but has also formed a allegiance with one of El Chapo's sons to try and, who is obviously Sinaloa cartel as well, to try and sort of take advantage of a civil war in the Sinaloa cartel. I think the operative point, though, is that as Mexico deals with President Trump and President Trump's interest in terms of bolstering efforts to reduce various drugs being smuggled into the United States, the leverage both militarily and politically through bribes, extortion, etc., that this cartel has on the Mexican government, President Sheinbaum, is increasingly significant. And so, as you suggested at the opening, there is this growing concern, I think, about the displacement of sovereign power by a non-state actor that is just extraordinarily powerful and has the means to say to a lot of, whether you're a police officer, judge, school teacher, whatever it might be, across the business person, do you want to run the risk of this person down the street who got assassinated 2 days ago because 3 days ago they said something negative about us? Or do you want to take a big bribe? And so there's that real undercurrent of instability.
So obviously there's been a lot of progress made in terms of reducing illegal entries of human beings from the border, but the Trump administration hasn't seemed very happy or at least satisfied yet with the reduction in the flow of drugs.
Yes, and we are seeing, I think, growing steps by the administration, especially sort of CIA covert action to generate more intelligence, potentially for the Mexicans to go after cartel leaders. I think there is disappointment in the administration that the Mexican authorities have not done that so much, which I think is both a function of corruption, but also concern that if you go after some of these kingpins, as has happened previously, they're going to start committing, the group, the kingpins belong to are going to start, committing more terrorist attacks, assassinations, etc., and creating real violent instability inside Mexico. But President Trump seems pretty insistent that he's going to push this agenda. And I think one of the things we have to be aware of in the United States is these cartels have made a vast amount of money to the level of almost state level, power of nation states, that they are going to be reticent to yield to escalating even American military or, CIA drone strike type assassination pressure. And that if they feel the US is pushing, the potential for them then to, kidnap American college students in Cancun or attack a cruise ship that is visiting a Mexican port or, do something even inside the United States will grow in tandem. And so at that point, you get into a kind of situation feasibly where you are dealing with terrorism against Americans, because, again, these groups have a lot to lose. And as they would see it, hopefully, at that critical point, they might judge that it's worth rolling the dice with escalation in terms of the United States, because then Trump might decide, well, this is getting a bit too much, and that they have such structural power in Mexico, the only thing you could really do is invade Mexico. And I don't think there's much appetite for that.
Sure. So if they're at a point where there's a realistic threat of terrorism within the United States, then surely they must also pose a threat to the Mexican government's sovereignty, no?
Exactly. And clearly they have calculated it up until this point. It is not in their interest to directly go after Americans, because I think they think the US action is relatively, it's not hurting them too much, right? But if that was to change, the risk would change. Clearly, though, if they have that leverage ability already inside Mexico, and the level of assassinations that this group has been linked to, very, very senior people, a level of corruption to people right up to the former President Obrador's brother has been linked in a recent investigation. This is an extremely powerful entity within inside the Mexican state that sort of exists as a kind of parasite on the shoulder of the Mexican state, and thus one might be able to argue is almost becoming the Mexican state.
The cartels and corruption have been a problem in Mexico for quite a while. Is this situation worse, or is it worsening, perhaps?
I think it's worse in the sense that the financial capital and power that this group has in terms of absorbing other cartels, becoming the preeminent cartel that really controls the levers of power, both in terms of the drug export market, but also the proximity to power in the Mexican state that covers, is sort of increasingly unprecedented. Looking back, I think the better example might be what happened in Colombia with Pablo Escobar, that you're seeing a situation that developed where actually the state itself becomes subordinated to the cartel.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you can read Tom's full story by clicking here on our digital magazine. As Democratic politicians begin their shadow campaigns for their party's 2028 presidential nomination, voters face a real problem. They have no solutions for our out-of-control national debt. Our Amy DeLaura reports on their sorry fiscal records of many of these possible Democratic presidential candidates.
I wasn't exaggerating when I said that I received in the mail a Trump 2028 hat from one of his biggest supporters. These guys are not screwing around.
While many Democratic governors are considered likely presidential candidates for 2028, only Governors Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, Andy Beshear, and Josh Shapiro have raised money outside their home states. And the four have very different reputations. Newsom and Pritzker are considered progressive Democrats. Beshear and Shapiro are considered centrists, mostly due to their state's political makeup. But a deeper dive into their record shows none of these governors are a fiscal hawk.
We have the money to reduce the tax burden of our people.
While Kentucky has enacted tax cuts under Beshear's watch, some of those cuts happened despite the governor. Beshear initially vetoed HB 8 in 2022, arguing it jeopardized targeted corporate incentives, though critics said he was protecting special interests at the expense of broader tax relief. The bluegrass state also experienced an explosion of government spending during Beshear's tenure. Kentucky has seen its budget rise from $11.4 billion in fiscal 2021 to $16.9 billion in fiscal 2026, according to the Urban Institute. It could have been much higher. Beshear's original proposal was for the, quote, largest budget that we've seen in history at $136.6 billion.
Our economy is booming.
Beshear received a D in Cato Institute's fiscal policy report card.
We actually are one of the leaders in the nation when it comes to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Very proud of that.
Shapiro, a finalist to be then Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate last year, has presided over a significant spending growth in Pennsylvania. The state budget rose from $40.8 billion in 2023 to $44.6 billion in 2024, and that's up from $36.6 billion in 2019. The state's independent fiscal office has warned the current $6.6 billion general fund surplus could be exhausted by the end of 2025.
I've put forth a balanced budget. It's fiscally responsible, and it makes critical investments.
Shapiro received a D in Cato's fiscal report card.
Can we explain to Californians how we moved from a $100 billion surplus to such a significant deficit in just a matter of a few years?
Well, we can explain it.
During Newsom's tenure as California governor, the state went from a $100 billion surplus to a $58 billion deficit. The Democrat responded by raising corporate taxes, reducing spending levels, and pulling money out of the rainy day fund. It's no wonder California has seen population exodus, losing over 200,000 residents between 2023 and 2024, according to the Census Bureau. Newsom's poll numbers sit at a 46% disapproval rate, according to Berkeley IGS poll. Newsom received a D from Cato for fiscal policy. His progressive colleague in Illinois, Pritzker, has taxed and spent Illinois since becoming governor in 2019. The state has seen its budget rise from $36.1 billion in fiscal 2020 to $53.1 billion this year. To pay for the spending, the billionaire governor pushed for billions of dollars in new taxes, including changing the state's flat tax to a multi-rate tax. Voters rejected the plans. And while he increased the cigarette tax by $1 in 2019, he raised nicotine pouch taxes even further to 45%. The IRS ranked Illinois second on the list of states seeing the most population loss due to taxes. That's only behind New York.
Take note.
Pritzker received a C from Cato for fiscal policy in 2024 after getting an F the year before. The big question remains whether voters believe the nation's fiscal standpoint should be the most important issue when they cast a ballot. Polls regularly show the public is concerned about the national debt. Gallup polls dating back to 2011 found at least 73% of those surveyed were worried about federal spending. This includes 81% just this past March. Pew Research found 57% of Americans want the federal government to reduce the budget deficit. But when it comes to the election, voters have regularly sent candidates who rack up more and more debt in Washington.
President Trump and I are laser focused on paying down the debt.
If no one in Washington is willing to take the lead on debt, then the next presidential election could just be another chapter in the nation's fiscal denial. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Amy. You can read that full story and the rest of the articles we've discussed today in our digital magazine at washingtonexaminer.com. This has been your Inside Scoop. I'm Jim Antle. We'll catch you next time.